morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Stephen Romo in for Savannah Sellers today. Right now on Morning News Now, new evidence coming to light this morning showing what investigators believe drove a man to attack the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That suspect now facing federal charges, accused of breaking into Pelosi's home, allegedly intending to kidnap her. What the suspect allegedly planned to do to Speaker Pelosi, and the latest on Paul Pelosi's condition. 1 week, just 7 days out from the crucial midterm election, which could change which party will control Congress. With more than 22 million Americans already voting early, we'll take you along the campaign trail where both parties are now calling in heavy hitters to help sway the undecided. Game changer. Breaking this morning, Pfizer releases promising new data on a vaccine that could help millions of children avoid the respiratory illness RSV. The current outbreak already filling up hospitals nationwide. We'll take a look at how this vaccine works and when we could see it rolled out. Plus, a herstory on the green. A group of black women are continuing a decades-long tradition on the golf course. We'll take you inside the oldest golf club for black women in the country and how they're helping the next generation. Very cool. Love to see that and love to be with you all this morning.
Yes, we're all filled with candy, right?
Yes, that's exactly how it should be. That sugar spike will get you through the morning, that's
exactly.
for sure. And we have a lot to get to this morning, beginning with the latest on the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband.
The suspect, David DePape, is set to appear before a judge today. Even before that arraignment, we're learning more from the FBI about his alleged plans. In an 8-page charging document, authorities say DePape admitted he wanted to, quote, hold Nancy hostage and break her kneecaps if she didn't tell him the truth. This morning, Paul Pelosi is still in intensive care, but in a statement, the Speaker's office said he's making steady progress on what will be a long recovery process. For more on all this, we are joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian in Washington. Ken, good morning to you. First of all, just take us through this charging document from the FBI. What have we learned?
Good morning, Joe. Well, this document both confirmed the accounts that we had already been hearing through law enforcement sources and added a new dimension with the confession of DePape to San Francisco police officers after they detained him, which lined up exactly with what we've heard, which is that he went there with a plan to detain and harm Nancy Pelosi. He came with a backpack full of equipment. He broke into the house, according to this affidavit, using a hammer to break glass, raising questions about the lack of security at the residence of the Speaker of the House in San Francisco. Got up to the second floor, surprised Paul Pelosi in his bedroom. Paul Pelosi asked where was Nancy Pelosi. Paul Pelosi told this attacker that Nancy Pelosi was not coming home anytime soon. He said he would wait. Paul Pelosi managed to get into the bathroom and call 911. What we learned from this document is that the assailant knew he did that, but decided to remain anyway, knowing the police were on the way, because the assailant told police that he believed he was opposing tyranny and that surrender was not an option. He told police, police arrived and saw both men holding this hammer and then asked if everything was okay. The attacker apparently said everything's fine, then wrested the hammer immediately away from Paul Pelosi, struck him in the head with it. Police tackled him and arrested him. The attacker later told police that his plan was to detain Nancy Pelosi and question her, and that if she lied, which he assumed she would, he was going to smash her knees with the hammer. And he wanted that to serve as a lesson to other members of Congress because he believed that Nancy Pelosi was in charge of what he called Democratic Party lies. So clearly a political motive here, and that's why the Justice Department brought this rarely used charge that makes it a crime to assault a relative of a federal officer with the intent to intimidate or coerce that officer, and that carries a penalty of 30 years in prison. So the Justice Department brought these additional charges, even knowing that the state, through the district attorney, was going to charge DePape with very serious crimes, which they have done, 6 charges, including attempted murder. So both the federal and state governments bring the weight of justice against this defendant.
So a lot of alleged details laid out there by authorities. Looking ahead, Ken, what comes next in the investigation? What kind of punishment could DePape potentially be facing?
He's facing decades in prison on both these federal and state charges. As you mentioned, he's due to appear in court today. And there are still some unanswered questions about this. Things that blanks we'd like to fill in. Is there a 911 tape that we could here, because, Joe, to be frank, there are awful conspiracy theories swirling around the internet about this for which there is no evidence, and it's in the interest of the authorities to get as much information out as possible, affirmative proof that this was what they say it was, which was two men who didn't know each other, and an attacker, a apparently deranged man who was living in a garage, allegedly taking these steps because he was in the throes of conspiracy theories and violent rhetoric.
I mean, let's talk more about that. I mean, the U.S. political landscape is really a minefield of conspiracy theories right now, including the ones surrounding this attack. So what have we learned about the suspects' beliefs, and is there now an effort to increase security for other lawmakers, especially with the midterms just a week away?
On security, there absolutely are discussions about, for example, whether family members of senior lawmakers need to be protected and whether security, writ large needs to be increased as there are these growing threats to lawmakers around election fraud and other issues. And then in terms of this suspect, a review of his social media shows a sort of a variety of beliefs all over the map, but more recently, he seems to have embraced the QAnon far-right conspiracy theories that have become so ubiquitous, and that he seemed to, there were even sort of Holocaust denial, pedophilia obsessions, really fringe stuff by this suspect in both blogs and social media postings, Joe.
A lot of new information this morning. Ken Delaney, thanks so much for laying it all out for us.
Well, as political leaders condemn the attack on Paul Pelosi and the conspiracy theories surrounding it, Jewish leaders are expressing concern over the rise of anti-Semitic messages on social media, which include plenty of conspiracy theories of their own. The amount of hate speech on Twitter has skyrocketed since Elon Musk's takeover, and it's making its way to the real world. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has the latest.
For many Jewish Americans, the hate message scrolling across the Florida-Georgia football game and a building in Jacksonville were flashing warning signs. Anti-Semitism is spreading. The Kanye West tweets, the banners hanging over freeways in Florida and California. In a rare joint statement, the universities of Florida and Georgia denounced the messages, saying, "We are proud to be home to strong and thriving Jewish communities, and we stand together against hate." The New England Patriots owner even ran a PSA during Sunday's games, urging all Americans to stand up to Jewish hate, as anti-Semitic content has surged on Twitter after Elon Musk, who emphasized free speech, took full control. Use of the N-word also jumped 500%.
I think that the narrative that hate speech is free speech, it's sort of winning out right now on these platforms.
The Anti-Defamation League reports 1,431 hate incidents so far this year, more than 2,700 last year. By comparison, 10 years ago, there were 927. Senior Rabbi Sue Shankman says members of her congregation in Washington are worried.
I've had people talk about the potential of moving elsewhere where there might not be anti-Semitism outside of this country. Would they go to Canada?
Fellow Americans who tonight are hoping that their country, their neighbors, will stand by them.
I support and will protect your child, and I hope that you would do the same for mine.
The anti-Semitic messages appear to be protected by the First Amendment. The concern, the messages could turn viral and physical. Back to you.
Troubling information. Tom, thank you.
The midterms are exactly 1 week from today, and candidates in key battleground states are making their final push to get voters to the polls. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is on the campaign trail.
In Arizona, the fight to the finish. Republican candidate for governor Kari Lake zeroing in on the economy in a state where inflation is among the highest, including gas prices averaging $4.30 a gallon.
So we'll do what we can here in Arizona to give relief.
Democrat Katie Hobbs has faced criticism for declining to debate her opponent, though blasting Lake as extreme.
This is a race not about Democrats or Republicans, but sanity over chaos.
Voters weighing in.
Why did you decide to go with Kari Lake?
The border and the economy.
Why vote for Katie Hobbs over Kari Lake?
I believe in her beliefs, and I trust her more than I do Kari Lake at this moment.
While in Georgia, a fiery debate in the governor's race. Democrat Stacey Abrams down in the polls, going after Republican Governor Brian Kemp on abortion rights.
He refuses to protect us. He refuses to defend us.
Kemp touting that Georgia was the first state to reopen after COVID.
We're one new COVID variant away from Miss Abrams wanting to lock our state down.
There are at least 9 competitive Senate showdowns that will determine the control of Congress, including Wisconsin, where Republican Senator Ron Johnson is running against Democrat Mandela Barnes.
What Democrat governance has done to the state, what it's done to our country, it's almost hard to describe.
Democrats getting last-minute help from former President Barack Obama.
Mandela's opponent has done more than just about anybody in Congress to spread conspiracy theories about the 2020 election.
This is go time for these campaigns in what are tight statewide races around the country. And that's why here in this final week, turnout and the effort to get voters to show up in these final 7 days is more crucial than ever.
All right, Vaughn, thank you so much. And make sure to tune in tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on NBC News Now for a Meet the Press election special with Chuck Todd and Kristen Welker. They'll break down the key races, what's at stake, with live reports from all the big election night battlegrounds.
Some breaking news to get to now from overnight. As many as 14 people, including children, were injured in a mass shooting in Chicago. This happened in a neighborhood called Garfield Park. People were holding a vigil there at the time, and police say it appears to have been a drive-by shooting. 3 children were among those shot, one of them as young as 3 years old. In that chaos, one person was also injured when they were hit by a car. Police say the investigation is still ongoing.
We have breaking news this morning from Pfizer. The pharmaceutical company has released data from its trials for a potential maternal vaccine against the common respiratory virus, RSV. That's a vaccine given during pregnancy. Pfizer says the vaccine was 81% effective against severe illness in the first 90 days of a newborn's life. That number then drops to about 69% during the first 6 months of a child's life. Pfizer says the vaccines also pose no safety concerns during these trials, and it plans to submit the first regulatory application by the end of the year. If approved, it would be the first maternal vaccine on the market. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel to help walk us through this breaking news. Doctor, good to have you with us. I mean, how much of a game changer could this be? We've been talking so much about RSV, and how is this vaccine able to help babies really from the moment that they're born?
Joe, this is a huge game changer. We do not have a vaccine for RSV for anybody, including infants. And it's incredibly important to administer it early, which is why this vaccine is administered during pregnancy, so that there's time for the mother to develop antibodies that can be passed on to the infant so that it can be the most effective the moment the baby is born. And that's because we see RSV severely affecting infants in that 0 to kind of 12-month time frame, Joe. It also affects older adults, and Pfizer has had a readout on the same vaccine for older adults. So this is good news all around, but especially for young children as we're filling up pediatric hospitals around the country right now.
Yeah, doctor, I mean, remind us of how serious of an illness RSV can be for babies. What happens inside the respiratory system, and why are newborns so vulnerable?
Yeah, so this can be a very mild cold in many people. And in fact, the majority of RSV cases we see are nothing more than what feels like a nuisance, Joe. So a cold that lasts for many days. But in younger children and especially older adults, we can see it attack the very small airways, so at the tippy ends of the lungs, and it can cause an inflammation that's also called bronchiolitis, and it's a very common inflammation in RSV infections that land babies in the hospital, especially if you have chronic conditions. And again, remember, this is something that you can't just take care of at home. So you do need to bring the baby into the hospital, where they often need assistance to help them breathe. This can also put them at risk for other diseases down the line. So we can prevent this. This is just a huge game changer. On average, we can see over 60,000 hospitalizations just in younger children alone. Combine that with older adults, we're talking hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations we might be able to prevent.
That's a huge number right there. And doctor, the company here is Pfizer. We know Pfizer has been at the forefront of creating the COVID vaccine series, from those initial 2 doses to the boosters. Has the technology used in that vaccine played any role in this one here?
Not necessarily the technology, but the insights. And just to build, this has been research that was first developed and helped funded by the NIH. So you see some themes here, right? We have a public investment, the private sector partners with the public investment, and then really helps it to take off. What is common about the COVID and RSV vaccines is that these are both vaccines that use a bivalent, the booster, which uses 2 types of COVID strains, and the RSV vaccine, also bivalent, using 2 subunits of the RSV vaccine. Both vaccines are different technologies, but develop antibodies against a protein that helps the RSV virus attach into the body and cause an infection, just like with the COVID vaccine, helping to develop antibodies against that spike protein to prevent it from attaching. So a lot that we can learn on and lean on, and a lot that we have to thank for science and research all around.
A useful science lesson there from Dr. Kavita Patel. Doctor, as always, thank you so much for breaking it down. We appreciate it.
All right, time for some more science now. Check with your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us. It's November. We're here.
Yeah, I can't believe it. It went so fast, but it feels like September.
It does.
So that's the good news, if you like warm weather. We're looking at temperatures well above normal in most of the nation, from the Intermountain West all the way through the plains into the upper Midwest, the Northeast, New England, and even into the Southeast. We're really warm as well. It's a small part of the country where we're cooler than average, and we're actually seeing some snow in that part of the country. So 43 states above average highs today. You add on the people, we're looking at 238 million people seeing above average highs, especially in the northern plains into the upper Midwest. We're talking record-breaking temperatures. So where you see these dots, these red dots are correlating to tie or record-breaking temperatures or tying them, and then the yellow dots are within 3 degrees of the record. So many, many records at risk today. Widespread warmth from the northern plains into the east. We're looking at temperatures into the 70s, 20, 25 degrees above normal for this time of year. Bismarck, 71 degrees. That's 23 degrees above average. 75 in Sioux City. Kansas City, 77 degrees. We're looking at Chicago, 68 degrees, and St. Louis, 75. We're going to hold on to that warmth tomorrow, so more record warmth as we go throughout Wednesday. Temperatures into the 70s. Bismarck, 75. Look at that, 28 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. 77 in Omaha. 60s in Indianapolis, near 70 degrees, though. And we're looking near the 60-degree mark in Burlington, 68 degrees in New York City. But we hold on to that warmth into the weekend. So if you're looking for a nice, mild weekend, you're going to have it in Philadelphia. 73 degrees on Saturday, near 80 degrees in Nashville. 77 Friday, 78 on Saturday. And same story in Cincinnati, near 80 degrees both Saturday and also on Sunday. Now, we do have a big difference in the West, especially the Pacific Northwest. We have a cold front that's moving onshore. That's bringing precipitation once again. It's been unsettled for a week and a half straight. We're seeing that once again today. This storm system will impact this part of the area tomorrow into Wednesday. So we're looking at lower elevation rain, where you see these brighter colors, the yellows, the reds, the oranges. That's where we're seeing the heaviest rainfall. But we're seeing a mix, too. So we're seeing the pink and the purple. That's where we're seeing sleet and some freezing rain. We're also seeing some snow. We could see up to 14 inches of snow in the highest elevations in portions of the Sierra, also the Cascades, into the Rockies. This is a setup. Area low pressure, cold front moving onshore. It's bringing that rain. It's bringing the snow. It's bringing really gusty winds, too. So winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour. That's going to reduce visibilities in many spots. We're looking at winds, especially along the coast. And then as we go throughout tomorrow, it kind of moves a little bit inland, a little bit to the south as well. So snow spreading into the Great Basin, also the Rockies. Showers will linger from Washington to California. That's good news. We need some rain there. So that's welcome rain as we head towards Wednesday. Winter alerts, where you see the white, that's your winter weather advisory. The pink is a winter storm warning. That means the snow is falling right now. We're looking at reduced visibility. We're looking at slick travel in many spots, especially with that wind blowing. And take a look at some of these snowfall totals. It's widespread, and where you see these blues and purples, we're looking at the highest amounts, especially pink, 12 inches or higher. So portions of Utah, we're seeing that. Also portions of Wyoming. Low-level elevation rainfall, we're looking at heavy rain throughout northern California, also portions into the Intermountain West. So depending on where you are, you could see some heavy rain, and that's going to cause some flash flooding in some spots. Out ahead of this front, we're looking at really gusty winds. Winds could gust up to 50 miles per hour. Along with that low humidity, we're looking at a fire danger, so elevated fire danger out ahead of this front. Back to you guys.
All right, Michelle, thank you.
Well, coming up on Morning News Now, Russia steps up airstrikes in Ukraine. How Ukraine is defending against these attacks, plus what NBC News has learned about a tense call between President Biden and Ukraine's president.
Also, it's Election Day in Israel. They're fifth in less than 4 years. We'll take a look at what today's vote could mean for tensions in the Middle East. Next. Ukraine is dealing with the fallout of Monday's missile strikes, which targeted the country's energy infrastructure. The mayor of Kyiv says 270,000 homes were left without electricity, while 40% of residents there had no water.
Yeah, all this as NBC News learns exclusive new details about a tense phone conversation between President Biden and President Zelensky. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley has more.
Ukrainians reeling from a relentless Russian missile barrage. The strikes targeting critical civilian infrastructure across the country, from Kyiv to Kharkiv to Zaporizhia. In the capital city, 350,000 homes left without electricity, while 80% of residents lost drinking water, according to local authorities. Many now forced to fill up jugs or buy limited supplies of bottled water just to get by, as authorities work to restore service.
У меня чайник есть с водой и бутыли две вот эти 18-литровые. Знаете, мне привезли Аляска.
Public transportation in Kharkiv even grinding to a halt. This just the latest in a Russian escalation targeting civilian infrastructure as frigid weather rapidly approaches.
I have a feeling the Russian aggressors want to freezing people in this winter.
While considerable, the damage could have been worse. Ukraine claiming their armed forces shot down 44 of 50 missiles. This latest round of missile strikes coming as concern mounts over foreign support for Ukraine's war effort. NBC News learning that in a tense June phone call, President Biden lost his temper with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after he asked for additional help on top of $1 billion aid package, according to 4 people familiar with the call. Biden telling his counterpart the American people were being quite generous and that Zelensky could show a little more gratitude. White House officials say the relationship has only improved since, but no end to this war is in sight. Fears once again the conflict could create a global food crisis. On Sunday, Russia pulling out of a deal to allow grain shipments out of Ukrainian ports. In retaliation, Russia claims for a drone strike on its navy.
Well, fears of a global food crisis combined with runaway inflation and surging energy costs in Europe have also sparked worries in Ukraine that the West may feel more pressure to negotiate with Russia. Our thanks to Matt Bradley for that reporting.
People in Israel are heading to the polls this morning for their 5th election in less than 4 years. And polls are showing that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a chance of returning to the office that he lost just over a year ago. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello breaks it all down.
Back in March of 2021, Israel held its 4th election in 2 years because those elections kept resulting in government stalemates. Israel's elections are not like U.S. elections. It's a parliamentary system. In order to form a government, parties must build coalitions to get 61 seats, the majority. Naftali Bennett, the leader of a right-wing party called Yamina, and Yair Lapid, the leader of a centrist party called Yesh Atid, announced they had formed a government on June 2nd, 2021. It was approved on June 13th. The coalition consisted of 8 parties from left and right and center. The plan was to have Bennett be prime minister for 2 years, half of the legislative term, and then Lapid would take over in August of 23. The main goal of the coalition was to unseat former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They succeeded, but on June 30th of this year, Israeli lawmakers voted to dissolve parliament under the weight of their own internal politics yet again. Now, Israeli citizens are heading to the polls for a 5th election in less than 4 years, and Netanyahu has a chance to regain power. Netanyahu is a polarizing figure currently on trial for criminal corruption, charges that he denies. Netanyahu's path to becoming prime minister again is dependent on the right, this wing a far right-wing party with a name that translates into Jewish power. The margins for elections in Israel end up being very small. A couple of thousand votes can determine whether a party gets over the threshold or doesn't. And because of the political gridlock and the chance of another stalemate, it's entirely possible there's another election coming after this one.
All right, let's get more on the Israeli elections with NPR international correspondent Daniel Estrin. He joins us now from Jerusalem. Daniel, good to have you with us this morning. Thanks for being here. So this election could see the return of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What are his chances of winning with those corruption charges hanging over him?
It's a really, really close race, Stephen. Netanyahu is close to having a slim majority, building a majority in parliament with religious parties and far right, really the fringe of the fringe on Israel's far right. They could just eke past the 61 seats that they would need in the 120-seat parliament. But also a possibility here is a stalemate. In that case, the centrist current Prime Minister Yair Lapid would stay in power as a caretaker, and then there would be new elections in many more months. An outright win for the anti-Netanyahu camp looks a lot more unlikely. This is a hodgepodge of parties, from Arab parties to centrist, leftist, moderate right parties. They're more fragmented. So it is going to be a nail-biter, and his corruption trial, Netanyahu's corruption charges, are a factor here. His far-right allies say that if they enter parliament with Netanyahu, that they would want to weaken the independence of the judiciary, and analysts say that means that Netanyahu might be looking to enter power in order to shake off his trial.
And speaking of the far right, as we've been mentioning, Netanyahu will likely have to form a coalition with the far-right religious Zionism bloc that includes the ultra-nationalist Jewish Power Party, whose leader could become a kingmaker of sorts in this election. Tell us a bit more about him.
His name is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He really is the star of this election. He holds the momentum in this election because he used to be really on the right-wing fringe, and now he is the most influential right-wing leader in Israel besides Benjamin Netanyahu. He in the past was convicted for anti-Arab activism. He several times in recent weeks and months has taken out his gun confronting Palestinians. The pro-Israel group AIPAC in the U.S. calls his party racist and reprehensible. However, Ben-Gvir is presenting himself as having moderated, and Netanyahu's own party is even endorsing that he's not as extreme, they say, as he was in the past. We've seen him tell his supporters, don't cry out death to Arabs, instead say death to terrorists. The center left in Israel is afraid of him, and speaking to voters today, people who don't want Netanyahu in power say Ben-Gvir is the possibility of him being in power is motivating them to the polls. But, speaking to right-wing voters, they seem a little bit mixed. Some of them say Ben-Gvir is tolerable. Some say he's a little too far to the right, but he will be a key cabinet minister if Netanyahu does enter office.
Well, Daniel, one issue that doesn't appear to be on the ballot is the Israeli occupation. Human rights groups accuse Israel of practicing apartheid against the Palestinians. So what's the mood like from voters on this, and what effect could this have on the election?
You know, it used to be that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, the whole question of whether a Palestinian state should be formed, that was one of the central questions of Israeli elections. It is not anymore. There's a broad consensus in Israeli politics that's something for the future, that a Palestinian state is nowhere, not in the cards for the near future. And instead, the main political divide in Israel is between those who want a liberal democracy and those who want a more nationalist, populist, conservative country. Now, the Arab voters in Israel, the 20% of Israel's citizens who are Palestinian Arab, they have voting rights, unlike Palestinians under occupation in the West Bank and Palestinians in Gaza. And the 20% of Israel's citizenry, the Arab vote, is critical in this campaign, in this election. If there is a high voter turnout among Arab voters, that could tip the scales away from Netanyahu winning. The polls have shown that there is a lot of frustration among Arab voters in Israel. They may not be coming out and getting out the vote, but that Ben-Gvir, the far-right figure, the possibility of him entering government, that might motivate Arab voters to the polls. So that's a key constituency to look for in this election, whether Arab voters get out the vote.
Some complicated dynamics. Daniel Estrin, thanks for breaking that down for us.
You're welcome.
Coming up, a major change may be coming to the college admissions process.
Yeah, after hearing arguments yesterday, the Supreme Court may be leaning toward ending affirmative action. We'll take a closer look at what that could mean for college applicants.
Plus, feeling gloomy? Well, maybe look to the sky. Up next, the new science showing how birds, not Twitter birds, real birds, can help boost your mood. Welcome back. After a grueling 5 hours of arguments on Monday, the Supreme Court might be set to overturn affirmative action for college admissions.
And a ruling that would overturn decades of precedent as well. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell gives us a closer look.
At the Supreme Court, a cultural crossroads.
We know that racism exists.
Today, race as a factor in college admissions is on the line.
I think it definitely needs to come to an end.
Decades of legal precedent for affirmative action in higher education could fall, potentially reducing the number of Black and Latino students at elite schools. Over a pair of cases challenging race-conscious admissions policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Today, conservative Justice Clarence Thomas voiced his skepticism.
I've heard the word diversity quite a few times, and I don't have a clue what it means.
The three liberal justices defended affirmative action for making institutions look more like America during 5 hours of arguments.
Race alone doesn't account for why someone's admitted or not.
Cecilia Polanco graduated from UNC in 2016 and says race remains an important consideration to level the playing field.
I think we need affirmative action because it will help make spaces more diverse. It will make, and that's better for everyone.
The conservative group behind these cases argues that using race in admissions discriminates against other students, namely Asian Americans, and that violates federal law and the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause.
This is a civil rights issue of Asians, and this is discrimination against Asians.
Around the country, 9 states have already ended affirmative action for school admissions. The court has a conservative supermajority with a 6-3 advantage and has shown a willingness to upend precedent, making the fate of affirmative action for higher education appear all the more fragile. The opinion will come several months from now when the court releases its decisions in June.
All right, Kelly, thank you.
Time now for our weekly mental health check-in. With more people experiencing hate speech on social media, we're taking a closer look at the serious impact that racism can have on your well-being.
Plus another question, how do you feel about unread emails? We'll look at the psychology behind why they terrify some people and don't seem to bother others.
Let's bring in Dr. George James for more. He is a licensed therapist and the Chief Innovation Officer at Council for Relationships. Dr. James, always good to have you with us. Let's start with the effects of hate speech, which just continues to make headlines day after day. Earlier in the show, we talked about the rise of anti-Semitic content on social media. We're also seeing a lot of racist content. So let's break it down. How does this affect the mental health of those who are on the receiving end of it? And then what can we do to protect ourselves or support friends and family who are going through this?
Good morning, Joe. And yes, when we hear racist comments, things of injustice, or experience injustice or racism ourselves, it does bring people to this place where they have higher levels of stress. They can experience anxiety and depression in high numbers. It actually also creates a level of lack of safety where you feel like there is nothing that's safe around you. And for some people, they develop these trauma responses that is close to PTSD, which means they feel like they are overwhelmed and flooded by negative experiences. And at the end of the day, sometimes it actually impacts people's immune systems and their ability to sleep. So it's a significant impact. It can actually bring people back to an earlier experience of discrimination and can be significantly overwhelming, even when we think it's just a small comment.
Dr. James, to a much, much brighter note now. A new study from the UK suggests watching or listening to birds can boost your happiness, even for those who suffer from depression. So how does that work, and does it actually have a similar effect just being in nature?
To me, this just makes sense, right? When we're outside and we see birds and sometimes we hear their songs, we say, wow, that they look so beautiful, they sound so pretty. There's something about it that feels good. And there's also the added benefit of being outside in nature. We saw throughout, especially in the very beginning of COVID, that when people didn't know what to do, they went outside. They were hiking, they were on trails, and they were looking up. And so there's a combination of being out there in nature, but then there's also the separate impact of just seeing nature, seeing animals, seeing birds do their thing, seeing a cardinal, seeing these amazing birds. I saw a wonderful eagles in Alaska this summer. It just feels great, and it's something that people benefit from. So I encourage you to go outside, look up, and listen, and you might actually start to feel better because it increases just your overall mood in general.
Nature's prescription right there. All right, finally, Dr. James, we all know that one person or a few people who has more than 1,000 unread emails in their inbox. For some, that number can be terrifying because that's just plain wrong. And for others, it means nothing at all, which is weird. All right, so you know which side of this I'm on.
I'm on the other side, yeah. I got like
Mine is
4,000.
constantly at 0. I'm not saying they're organized, but it's always at no unread emails. So why do different people experience different emotions like us when opening their inboxes, and can those emotions be managed?
Yeah, this is really just fascinating on how like our emails and probably even notifications, which might go into social media, can impact us. Some people feel they need to do it right away, and it might be connected to some personality, maybe someone who might be considered themselves introverted or perfectionist, or someone who just feels like they need to get things done, check off their list. While on the other side, which I might say that that's where I am, they're not overwhelmed by a lot of things on your inbox. And some of it is that you might actually be stressed with trying to get it done, or you are doing so many other things that you just can't get to it. So, you know, no matter what, it's to figure out what bothers you the most and do it. So if you need to check it off, check it off. If you're okay with it, be okay with it. But don't allow yourself to get too stressed and overwhelmed that it causes other concerns for you going forward.
Okay, I understand it now. Thank you, Dr. George James. As always, we appreciate having you on.
Yeah, fascinating insights.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, coming up, a new TikTok trend is taking aim at body image issues and diet culture. It involves something called almond moms, mothers who police how much their kids eat, while users are calling out this behavior now and the changes they want to see.
Plus, show me the money. A new law in New York now requires employers to add a salary range to job postings. So what that means for applicants and current employees, next. Welcome back. Starting today, most New York employers must start including salary in their job listings. This means workers will get to see a possible minimum and maximum pay range before they apply. CNBC senior media and tech correspondent Julia Borston takes a closer look at this long-awaited effort toward pay transparency.
Do you like it? I love it.
Hannah Williams runs Salary Transparent Street. She asks random strangers a very personal question.
I'm in cybersecurity.
How much do you make?
Around $85K a year.
I'm in tech sales. How much do you make? Between like 70 and 80K.
I'm a hydraulic engineer.
And how much do you make?
Yearly? About 130,000.
I try to remove the taboo about talking about pay.
The content she shares has drawn more than 1.5 million followers across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
People are using the information that we share on our page really to advocate for themselves. They're realizing that they have to educate themselves on market research. They have to look up their salary and look up their job title and their salary and do the research to find out how much they should be making. So really, we're just putting that education and empowerment in their hands.
New pay transparency laws in New York City and California, and those already in effect in Colorado, will impact 1 in 6 U.S. workers, according to PayScale. These laws aim to close gender and racial pay gaps, and those gaps are large. Women working full-time in the U.S. make 83 cents for every dollar men earn, and for women of color, the gap is even wider. But we're hearing optimism from PayScale, a software and services company helping 10,000 corporations, including half the Fortune 500, audit their compensation practices.
Organizations are going to be trying to get kind of their ducks in a row, trying to figure out what their compensation strategy is, how frequently they're going to be reviewing compensation, and making sure all their folks internally and any job postings are accurate in terms of pay scale.
The new New York City law has faced some opposition from Wall Street banks and others, arguing it forces them to disclose too much to rivals. But PayScale's Cyclee says many companies are proactively embracing transparency.
It's really a branding issue for organizations. And in this market, that's still a candidate-driven market, organizations need to come up with all sorts of different ways to try and attract and retain the top talent, and that's one of them.
Gen Z and younger millennials expect greater transparency from their employers.
How much do you make?
They're talking more about their salaries, and the taboo is disappearing.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Our thanks to Julia for that report. If a company does not comply with the new law, job seekers can file complaints with the city's Commission on Human Rights, and businesses could face civil penalties up to $250,000.
To more financial news now. The current fuel price hikes and low diesel supply are causing economic concerns and could affect holiday prices.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Joe, Stephen, good morning to you. We'll start with diesel prices because they're surging and could go even higher. Futures for November delivery have risen more than 30%. And AAA says the national average is now $5.31 a gallon. That's up nearly $2 from a year ago. Analysts say the market is facing a perfect storm with diesel reserves at the lowest levels in 60 years, a drought on the Mississippi River pushing more freight to trucks, and a possible railroad strike. The biggest shortfalls are in the Northeast and New England. Refineries on the East Coast are making as much diesel as they can and are highly dependent on barges and tankers for supply. Call of Duty is back in a big way. The latest version of the popular video game Modern Warfare 2 is the fastest selling title in the franchise since it began in 2003. Sources telling Barron's sales have topped $600 million since it hit the market on Friday. That's comparable to the box office debuts of the biggest Marvel movies. The strength of this year's Call of Duty game is notable following last year's disappointing release. And move over Florida. The Keystone State dominates this year's list of the best places to retire. U.S. News and World Report says Pennsylvania has secured 3 of the top 5 spots. Lancaster is number 1 due to its scores on health care for seniors, tax rates for retirees, and the overall happiness of residents. Harrisburg is second, followed by Pensacola, Tampa, and York, Pennsylvania, guys.
Wow, good for Pennsylvania. Who knew?
That's right.
Some variety there. I like that.
Yeah.
Savannah, thank you.
You got it.
Now to a new trend on TikTok that has younger users speaking out about body image issues. It's being called Almond Mom, which basically means a parent who goes overboard policing their kids' food.
TikTokers are now sharing their own experiences with so-called almond moms. Posts with that hashtag have been viewed nearly 7 million times.
NBC News youth and internet culture reporter Callan Rosenblatt joins us now for more on this. Callan, good morning to you. So first, walk us through how this all began and where that term Almond Mom actually came from.
Good morning. So almond moms have like a few different origins. Some people point to a clip, a years-old clip from Yolanda Hadid, in which she tells her then teenage daughter Gigi Hadid, if you're feeling weak, just eat a few almonds. Other people sort of took this and ran with it on TikTok. They sort of made fun of their mothers who said, after a handful of almonds, I'm not hungry for dinner. I'm all full from that. And we're kind of joking like, Mom, you can't be full off a handful of almonds. And this, again, evolved into some young women who made parodies of their mothers and the sort of extreme behaviors around policing food, not having really fun snacks in the house, and over-exercising. Some sociologists call this behavior that has been termed almond mom is actually orthorexia, which is an obsession with healthy eating and sort of quote-unquote clean eating to the point of maybe being a problem.
I mean, so research suggests parents can have a big influence on how their children see food, how they see their bodies. That could potentially lead to eating disorders. And I know you've been speaking with experts. How does that happen? And have these parents at all become a scapegoat for a larger issue with diet culture?
A lot of sociologists and dietitians that I spoke with said the number one factor when it comes to how young people view their bodies is how their parents talk about their bodies. And research points to particularly how mothers speak about their bodies will have a massive impact on how young people see their bodies. Now, some sociologists also said they felt that this was sort of a scapegoat on moms, that moms are typically burdened with childcare in this country. And in order to, quote unquote, raise your child well, there's this expectation that they also have to be thin. Now, sociologists say that's an unfair expectation to put on mothers. And a lot of young people I spoke with actually said sort of participating in this conversation made them have more empathy for their moms. It made them realize this sort of diet culture that their mothers and their mothers' mothers have been subjected to, and that a lot of these behaviors aren't originating with their mothers. They're a much larger issue with diet culture in general.
Wow, turning toward empathy with that one, Callan. Well, how are younger generations just trying to put an end to the whole almond mom discourse?
So a couple of the young women that I talked to who are making almond mom content said that making the content made them really reassess the way that they talk about their bodies and the way they talk about food, not only with their friends and their peers, but also with their siblings. I talked to one young woman who has a series on almond moms. Her name is Tyler Bender. And she said she has a 10-year-old sister. She's 20. And she said now when she's around her sister, she's really careful about the way she talks about food, the way she talks about whether her jeans fit or not, because she doesn't want her younger sister to internalize that and think the same things about her own body. It's also started a conversation with her own mom about how they both talk about food. And they're both together now trying to educate themselves and break the cycle. So a little bit of a positive spin coming out of this conversation.
I'll take that optimism every turn we can get it. Callan Rosenblatt, thanks so much. Well, if you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, please contact the National Eating Disorders Association. You can reach them at 1-800-931-2237 or text NEDA to 741-741. The number's there on your screen.
Coming up, more than just soul sisters, two best friends used to joke about being sisters. Turns out they really are.
Yeah, this is a wild one. We'll show you how they discovered they are actually related and take you inside that emotional journey to track down their biological family. That's coming up next.
Welcome back. Taylor Swift has just broken another record with her new album, Midnight. Swift is now the first artist to occupy all top 10 slots on the Billboard Hot 100. The #1 spot is taken by Anti-Hero, featuring the lyric, "It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me," which has inspired millions of social media posts. Sorry, I didn't sing that. Lavender Haze comes in second, followed by Maroon and Snow on the Beach, before Swift took all 10 spots on the Hot 100. Last year, Drake had managed 9 out of 10. Not too shabby. Midnights, which dropped October 21st, also became Spotify's most streamed album in just one day. I tried to read that with the same enthusiasm that Savannah would. I hope I did her proud. You've been listening, right?
Yeah, I've listened to Savannah. Was actually very disappointed last time I was with her. Yes, I have not listened. Now I've heard several anti-heroes everywhere.
Yeah, it is.
You can't help but listen to that.
That's a good one.
Okay, this next story now, I love to tell you about this. Some friends might joke that they're meant to be sisters, but two Connecticut women, that joke actually became their reality. The pair discovered they were biological siblings after taking an at-home DNA test. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson followed their journey to the Dominican Republic for an emotional reunion with their father.
This is my entire family!
A reunion more than 3 decades in the making on an island 1,500 miles from where Julia Tignetti calls home.
It was important for me to meet my dad.
Julia flew from Connecticut to the Dominican Republic for just that.
And I was fine until I saw my family standing out of the doors. And I looked and I saw my dad. And I'm not a crier usually, but when I saw him, I just started crying.
The moment she met her biological father for the first time in her life. By her side, Cassandra Madison, the newfound sister who inspired the journey. Our NBC affiliate WVIT has followed their story.
To see our dad just light up. It's amazing.
Cassie and Julia met while both worked at a New Haven restaurant in 2013.
I have the Dominican flag tattooed on my arm, and Julia walks by and she's like, "Oh, I'm Dominican too."
Both were adopted from the Dominican Republic and both grew up in Connecticut, but they checked their adoption paperwork and nothing matched up. In 2018, Cassie took a DNA test. A year later, she reunited with her biological father in the Dominican.
Remember the day that I had asked our dad if he had put another little girl up for adoption, and it looked like somebody took the wind out of him.
It turns out he had. Cassie began urging Julia to take a DNA test too.
I hopped in my car and drove to Julia with a 23andMe kit and shoved it in her face and told her she had to do it.
The results? Stunning. Julia frantically texted Cassie to share her news.
I'm like, "So the results are in," and she's like, "Okay, and what are they?" And I'm like, "I am in fact your biological sister." And she just started crying.
This year, the two made their first trip to the Dominican together as sisters.
My dad ran to me and he just gave me the biggest hug. He's crying.
Julia danced with her dad, shared a meal with her family, and rode dirt bikes around the island. Their biological mother died of a heart attack in 2015.
The first time in 35 years that our father has had all of his 9 kids together. Holy cow moment.
Making up for lost time and creating memories that they hope will last a lifetime. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News.
That is a holy cow moment. All right, we end this hour in Maryland, where a group of black women is continuing a decades-long tradition that's rooted in community and support. NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor goes inside the Wake Robin Golf Club, the oldest group in the country for black women.
Great shot, kiddo.
It's a community formed out on the fairways.
It's another opportunity to strengthen sisterhood.
The Wake Robin Golf Club is the oldest in the nation for black women. Formed in Washington, D.C. in 1937, when courses were still racially segregated.
The club was needed because there wasn't a place for Black women to play golf.
It's 2022. Why do you think it's important to have an all-Black women golf club?
Because we're still missing.
Paulette Savoy has been a member since 1985.
It's good to be able to sit down with people that are in the struggle with you and known what you've gone through.
Young women that you connect with through this club, what are you hoping they take away?
I just hope they take away confidence when they're in business and business is being conducted on the golf course. They can get right in there, and hold their own.
The club provides stipends for players in need and gives out scholarships to students like Kendall Jackson, a junior member who hopes to turn pro.
I'm so grateful for their company, being able to learn from them, talk with them, share their experiences about what it's like being a Black woman in golf.
Stronger on and off the green.
Yes, good job.
For generations to come.
We hope that our presence will inspire that young Black girl that, hey, you can be out here too, you can do this.
Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News, Mitchellville, Maryland.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But your news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.